We got a big one tonight. We got a big show, so we should probably get into it. Let's start with let's just start with the vaccine updates, the vaccine mandate lawsuits updates. I'm not up to speed on it. What's the latest coming out of the States?
Sure. So, there were vaccine mandate protests all around the world, even in places like Kuwait, where you don't often see protest. So it's extraordinary. Not only in Italy and UK and a range of places throughout Europe, but it was striking to see it in places like Kuwait. You've seen places in South Africa, other places. So it's a worldwide global resistance phenomena. And this week in the States, we saw a continuation of a prior trend, but we also saw something new, which is we're starting to see vaccine mandate strikes. It appears they're doing them as sick outs, what's called sick outs. Basically, a whole bunch of people decide they're sick on the same day. Apparently, Southwest is trying to keep a lid on it because Southwest is already facing suit because the allegation of the Southwest Pilots Union is that this violates the Railroad Labor Act's labor provisions. And so, in essence, the labor provisions require that you can't just unilaterally impose something on something that's already been negotiated in a different direction. So they're pursuing it as a labor rights matter under federal law. They have a temporary injunction request pending in federal court in Dallas, Texas. And apparently a bunch of the pilots decided to act on it. And anybody knows pilots, they're like baseball players. They're baseball pitchers, very iconoclastic individuals who tend to walk their own walk and don't tend to take to anybody telling them what to do, especially with their own body. I won't get into the medical concerns that have been raised by military experts for pilots, but be aware all that will be discussed at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But rest assured that pilots are aware of that information. So they're particularly concerned about certain aspects of this particular drug. So apparently they did a massive surprise sick out, even though the Southwest had been warned about it. And it caused thousands of flights in different places all across the country to be canceled over the weekend. Not only that, there were protests in Seattle by port workers and ferry workers that's caused major problems. The vaccine mandate may relate in part to what's happening at the ports and the delay in the supply chains of workers not being available in different places simply to get things off a boat. There's talk of school bus drivers in various cities also doing sick outs because there's been sudden problems there. Robert. So expect the strike and labor resistance to grow dramatically as people see the likely success the Southwest pilots will have.
And now that's the question. Did Southwest deny or not confirm any disruption? Because now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if it was on Twitter or our locals page. People were saying they live under Southwest air routes, and there's been no traffic. And apparently Southwest is not recognizing any interruption to services.
Southwest is just saying if you call in, we're having a temporary surge of calls. So things like that. They're trying to pretend it's not what it is. And so because they don't want people suddenly canceling a bunch of their flights. And because Southwest usually has a pretty generous refund policy. And so that would, that it could cause all kinds of issues that they did not anticipate. And it's important to note Southwest Airlines initially said they were not going to do a vaccine mandate because they're known as an independent, iconoclastic kind of airline by their policies and procedures and personnel in the past. And the Biden administration purportedly put direct pressure on them. So we'll see how all this turns out. Of course, the United suit is still pending. American Airlines is looking at pilots are not only looking at suing, but also because a lot of these airlines initially backed off and said they were not going to pursue the mandates, at least as the pilots. And then they changed their position after apparent pressure from the Biden administration. And pilots are just not the kind of people to lay down. And their unions are not so politically corrupted as to also lay down. Tyson Foods labor, some of its unions laid down, proved how useless they are. So that's one stage of suits. Another stage of suits is once again, religious accommodations are winning in court. There's a lot of lawyers out there engaged in massive legal malpractice. I'm hearing more and more stories of both governmental lawyers and corporate lawyers giving bad legal advice to their clients, telling them that they have to do a mandate, telling them not to respect religious accommodations. And they're going to ultimately get sued. It's only going to be a matter of time. Might be 6 months from now, maybe 2 years from now. But there's a lot of law firms and lawyers that are going to be sued for giving bad legal advice because they don't know what they're talking about. When you get your news from the CNN legal analyst who can't hack it in the real world, that's not a good method of, that's not going to be considered doing your due diligence. And as an example, now religious accommodations going all the way back to the Obama administration. I detailed at the vivabarneslaw.locals.com this week videos showing that both the Biden EEOC and the Obama administration EEOC have recognized the right to exemptions from vaccine mandates, and that religious beliefs don't require theistic beliefs. Religious beliefs are really about your conscience. It's explicitly recognized that non-theistic moral code beliefs about life, the purpose of life, the meaning of life, about things that go to your core conscience, those are also recognized, respected, and protected under the law. And in my view, there's no stronger moral belief than informed consent. And many people refuse. There are various media personalities baffled by why people would be asserting who don't have a problem with the vaccine themselves, but aren't taking it because they object to what's happening on moral grounds. It's because for many people, informed consent is a part of their conscience, and they refuse to partake for that reason. And for those people who don't think informed consent could be a serious purpose about life, about the deep moral code, we killed people at Nuremberg who violated that code. That's how much we considered it a deep moral belief. To violate it, you could be summarily executed like they were at Nuremberg. So I think that, but all those cases, all won again. Religious accommodations won in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, won in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, kind of implicitly won in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals when the University of Indiana dropped their objections to religious accommodations. So now we're seeing a pattern going all the way back to the Obama administration. There's over a dozen cases where religious accommodations have all won, and any employer who denied it lost.
And now I want to bring this one up because Project Veritas put out a video, which take it for what it's worth, because some people are going to say the individual in the video doesn't know what he's talking about. They'll find ways to get around it, but seemingly confirmed, the origins or what is used in these vaccines, which is at the root of a lot of people's religious or conscientious objections to taking the vaccine. Robert, I know you heard what Justin Trudeau said in Canada. Just not wanting to is not a good religious conviction, and they're going to make it damn difficult to get one, and it'll be very onerous, is what he said. Even in these cases, the one I think I saw, the Michigan case, which was from the Court of Appeals, confirming or not staying the injunction that stayed the vaccine mandate policy. When they're using religious exemption, though, I think people still get the impression they're using it is as in a Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu thing, and not as in even an atheist can raise the religious objection. Elaborate on what that concept means under American law, and that it's not limited to the big four religions.
Our views, I mean, the whole history of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which this implements, is that religion is about a matter of individual conscience, that it's not about organized acceptance. So the EEOC, Obama's EEOC filed suit on behalf of people against the flu vaccine mandate all across the country. They won every single one of them, and it was for nurses against hospitals. And some of them claimed that it was necessary, that there's a defense that says that, basically it's business necessity to do it. All the hospitals lost. And if they lost, ain't nobody else going to be winning. And so, but it's clear Biden's own EEOC, and I put up a video description of it at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. People can go and see the content list of all the vaccine lawsuit discussions. Has its own playlist on the content section, but went through what the Biden's own EEOC talks about. And this is what courts have recognized for decades now, which is under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which you also have your state analog version of that. Sometimes is more extensive and expansive than it. What they mean by religious belief is not what the New York governor thinks it means. What the law means is any action of individual conscience. Is it about your purpose in life? Is it about your meaning in life? Is it about right and wrong? Is it about a moral code? It's all code for conscience. In fact, if you read some of the cases, they'll talk about that explicitly and expressly. So just think of it. Is my opposition because I don't like Joe Biden? Or is my opposition because this offends me at a deep level? And the reason why this issue is so animated and so intense is because it offends people at a very deep level. I mean, not everybody, but more than a few. Indeed, if you get honest polling, as Richard Barrett's People's Pundit has done, from the Public Polling Project, funded by the people. Over about between 2/3 and 3/4 of Americans object to these mandates. They say that you should not fire anybody because they refuse it or reject it. So it's in fact, indeed, often medical and religious reasons, political and religious reasons can overlap, as the EEOC says. The fact that it's also political or also medical does not make it any less religious. What matters is that it's about your moral code. It's about the purpose of life. It's about living. Your body is your temple is a very commonly held belief in a wide range of people. That's a part of their moral code. The Obama administration sued hospitals who denied that as a religious accommodation and won. The Biden EEOC admits that's still the case in its own compliance manual.
Where can I know that we've seen it? Where can we find the Obama EEOC so that people can read it for themselves?
So I put up a description of it at a video at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which has the caption of each of the different claims, pointing out this suit, and then they went through. And I'll be uploading those to I'll be uploading those to Locals. They're working on getting that done so we can upload PDFs there. And so once that's done, that's where we'll have them. I'm going to continue to put up a whole index of all of the suits that have been filed. But again, religious accommodations is the way to go. Where there has been struggle has been natural immunity. So the first suit that was filed on natural immunity, George Mason University, they folded and capitulated rather than gamble and lose in court. In California, a George W. Bush appointee relied on Jacobson, and that was what we discussed last week. In my view, deliberately misinterpreted Gorsuch's words. And said that as long as there's any scientist out there who believes that it's possible the vaccine is better than natural immunity, then the university can do whatever it wants. Again, I think it was in Michigan. It may have been another state. Another George W. Bush appointee said that they could fire someone that had natural immunity. And again, they're ignoring the fact that in Jacobson, that mandate excluded people who had natural immunity. So they've never approved. No court has previously approved a vaccine mandate to be imposed on people who are already immune from the disease. So that too itself is new.
No, but it's also atrocious in that for talking about the party or the people that say trust the science, follow the science, we know, and this is not medical advice, this is nothing. This is just, it's known now that vaccinated people can contract, and communicate the virus. And so the idea being that you need to impose the vaccine passport and terminate, as opposed to just ensure that the individuals are not infected. The idea to emphasize the vaccine passport over a negative test, knowing what we know now, is wholly unscientific. And that's not even getting into the constitutional issue. So if people are not compelled by the constitutional arguments, at the very least be compelled by the science that these people are imploring others to find or to follow. And the immunity, I mean, what's the present both sides, but I mean, we now know the immunity theory is that natural immunity lasts longer than vaccine immunity. The question is not knowing when you receive the immunity or how long the immunity is going to last. Can you then nonetheless still compel vaccination? So one court out of California says yes.
So yeah, one federal court in California said that, and another court, I believe it was in Michigan this week, also said that as long as the first test was rational basis review. They said no strict scrutiny, no intermediate scrutiny. If it involves vaccine mandates, that's just rational basis. That's a misconstruction and misapplication of Jacobson, a decision that shouldn't be respected at all anyway, as it was the sole basis for the eugenics approving decision of Buck v. Bell. Anybody citing that decision has no clue what they're doing. They don't understand the morally horrific consequences that flowed from that decision. But putting that aside, the decision doesn't even say that. That decision said a state legislature could authorize a health board to impose a fine on someone, a very small fine, if they didn't take a vaccine that had a century of history of being safe and effective as it relates to a epidemic that opposed a lethality rate of 1 in 3 of people who got it dying. That is nothing. That is no comparison at all to any of these circumstances. These courts are pretending otherwise, and they're embracing Jacobson for what the eugenics court did, which say this means the government can do whatever it wants in the name of public health, and what the Korematsu case did. The government can do whatever it wants in the name of emergency. So that's the first thing they did. They cited this morally horrific decision, which whatever you think about vaccines or vaccine mandates, you should be terrified that courts are talking about giving government that power again, because that is what led to the Nazis.
I know our audience, our regulars know Jacobson was the smallpox case 1905, where incidentally it was not compelled vaccination, even the outcome and the decision. It was a monetary fine, which was the equivalent of what, 100, 200 bucks today for not getting the vaccine in the context of smallpox outbreak with a vaccine that had been, had a little more history to it. The Buck decision was the forced sterilization of women of a certain demographic. You can elaborate on the basis that they were, and I'm quoting, I think it was idiots was the word in the decision, intellectually deficient and therefore should not have kids or procreate or have offspring because it would be detrimental to the world. Forced sterilization. And I believe it was 8-1, Robert. Am I mistaken, or was it unanimous?
Yeah, that's my recollection. 8-1, as I recall.
So these are the decisions. And then you had the Korematsu one, which comes up every now and again, which was, detainment of Japanese Americans because they were perceived as an existential threat to the United States because of what happened at Pearl Harbor. But it's the Buck one that I think most people don't appreciate, was forced sterilization of women who were deemed to be mentally deficient to the point where, they should not have kids, and the government should decide that they should not have kids. Was there a demographic issue in that case as well, Robert, or did I?
At least in consequences, absolutely. It was disproportionately Black women, poor white women, and Native American women. And by the way, they did it under a disguise. They told them they were doing something different than what they were doing most of the time. And so, I mean, it was one of the most morally horrific, and they continued to do it through the mid-1970s. And kind of like what they're doing with some of the testing of this vaccine. They picked on orphans. They picked on people that were disadvantaged and unprotected, people that were inmates, people that were in communities or constituencies that did not have political power or social status. And unleashing that power. It's not a surprise that George W. Bush judges like that power. That's why, some of us have never been Bushites. So the people assume things because of where I am politically now. I've never liked any Bush. And so because this is their ideology down deep, and it goes way back and go back to grandpa. So it's not a surprise that George W. Bush judges are the ones issuing these kind of rulings. But it's clear that they're not going to respect natural immunity at this point with any consistency. Now, just because these two cases lost out of the gate doesn't mean anything long term. The California professor is going to fight it all the way through. I'm sure the same is true in Michigan. This is just they don't get emergency injunctive relief. The rest of the fights are just beginning.
No, and it's an amazing thing. Like I know the rules of YouTube, so I can't even have these queries that I have in my mind. But the idea of having natural immunity, which means having already contracted it, compounded with taking a vaccine. I mean, I wonder. You have to wonder. Like, at what point is more not necessarily better, and at what point can people, ought they have the right to make their own decisions? That I'm more comfortable with on a legal basis, and that is
the other. Yeah, and so that's those suits, but and then a bunch more suits. First responders continue to file suits all across the country. Employees continue to file suits all across the country. And I filed suit this week against Tyson Foods for its discrimination against people who asserted religious objection. It's discrimination against people who had medical objections in Dyer County, Tennessee, and filed it on behalf of all Tyson employees that could be impacted by it. We'll be seeking injunctive relief this week. I detail the whole suit in a video because of the suit has a lot of medical information in it that YouTube doesn't like discussed. You can get the whole details of that suit, and I'll be posting the suit either probably by tomorrow, as soon as Locals gets the PDF aspect up and going at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, and it will be only one of the beginning. New York Times just 3 days ago said, it's amazing, praised Tyson Foods vaccine mandates, said, and they haven't faced any lawsuits over it. That was a little premature for the New York Times. Maybe if they followed this channel, they wouldn't have got that wrong like they got some other COVID things wrong this week.